The letter sat on the laminate kitchen table, right next to the photograph of Martha. It was printed on heavy bond paper, the kind that feels expensive between your calloused fingers. I didn't need my reading glasses to understand the word terminated, stamped in red ink across the top. 43 years at the mill, 2 years in the jungle near Da Nang, and now the Republic Steel Pension Fund was telling me I no longer existed. My hands didn't shake. Men like me don't let their hands shake. I looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that eats at your bones. I reached for the light switch to see the fine print, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. The kitchen remained draped in the gray Cleveland dusk. I walked to the window. The street lights were humming outside, but my house was a tomb. I picked up the rotary phone. No dial tone. They hadn't just cut the pension, they'd cut the lifeline. "It's a mistake, Martha," I whispered to the empty room. "Just a clerical error." I went to the fridge. The insulin for my diabetes was in the butter compartment. It needed to stay cold. I touched the vial. It was already becoming lukewarm. I had exactly $12 in my wallet and a half tank of gas in the 2004 Buick. The front door creaked open. It was David, my son. He didn't knock. He never did. He looked at the darkened house, his eyes darting to the letter on the table. "Dad, why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, his voice tight. "Pension's gone, Dave. Lights, too. I need to get to the SSA office or the bank first thing in the morning." David didn't look surprised. He looked annoyed. He picked up the letter, crumpled it slightly, and shoved it back at me. "Dad, the mill closed years ago. Things happen. Maybe it's time we talk about that assisted living place in Parma. You can't manage this house anymore." "I built this house with my own 2 hands, David. Your mother died in that bedroom. And you're gonna die here too in the cold if you don't listen to me," he snapped. He didn't offer to help. He didn't offer a candle. He just turned around and walked out, leaving me in a house that was fast becoming a refrigerator. I sat back down and opened my wallet. $12. I looked at my dog, Blue, a mangy lab mix who was watching me with liquid eyes. He hadn't eaten since morning. I stood up, grabbed my old VA jacket, and headed for the Walmart down the road. I'd buy Blue a bag of kibble and maybe a flashlight. But as I pulled my Buick out of the driveway, a white tow truck pulled in behind me, blocking the exit. A man stepped out, holding a clipboard. "Raymond Carter, I'm here for the vehicle. Repossession order filed this afternoon." My heart gave a painful thud against my ribs. "There's no debt on this car. I paid it off in 2008. The man looked at me with a shred of pity. "Take it up with the bank, Pop. My paperwork says you defaulted on a title loan signed 3 weeks ago." I hadn't signed a single paper in 3 years. I stood on the sidewalk, my old bones aching against the damp Ohio wind, watching the taillights of my Buick vanish into the night. Blue whined at my heels. I felt small. For the first time in 79 years, I felt like a ghost in my own neighborhood. I walked 3 miles to the 24-hour Walgreens. Every step was a battle with the arthritis in my hip, a parting gift from the mill floor. I needed to get ice for my insulin. If the medicine spoiled, I wouldn't make it to the end of the week. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights hurt my eyes. I made my way to the cooler and grabbed 2 bags of ice. At the register, I laid out my $12. "That'll be $8.50, Mr. Carter," the girl said. She knew me. I'd lived here longer than she'd been alive. I reached for my wallet to pull out the 10, but my fingers hit something else. A small velvet box. I'd carried Martha's engagement ring in my pocket every day since her funeral. It was my anchor. "Is everything okay, Raymond?" she asked. "Fine, Susie. Just a long day." I paid, shouldered the ice, and began the long trek back. My shadow stretched out long and thin under the street lamps. When I finally reached my porch, I saw a silhouette sitting on my steps. It wasn't David. It was a man in a suit I didn't recognize. "Mr. Carter, I'm Mr. Henderson from the Pension Oversight Committee. We received your voluntary waiver form." I dropped the ice. The bags popped, cubes skittering across the wood like diamonds. "My what?" "The document you signed, surrendering your monthly payments to the Legacy Care Trust. It's all legal, Raymond. You signed away the rights in exchange for end-of-life coordination." "I signed no such thing," I barked, my voice cracking. "I worked 43 years for that money. I bled for it. I missed my son's birthdays for it." Henderson sighed, a sound of pure boredom. "We have the digital signature, Raymond, and a witness. Your son, David, acted as the notary. He said you wanted to settle your debts before the transition." "Transition? What transition?" He didn't answer. He just handed me a business card and walked toward his car. "If you feel there's been a mistake, you can file a grievance, but the office is closed for the holiday weekend. You won't get a hearing for 10 days. I went inside and sat in the dark. I didn't have 10 days. I had ice that was melting and a stomach that was growling. I walked to the kitchen and opened the last can of soup. I poured half into Blue's bowl and left the rest for myself. I needed to call my daughter, Sarah. She lived in California. She was the only one who might help. I walked to the neighbor's house, the Millers. We'd been friends for decades. I knocked on the door, feeling the sting of humiliation. Asking for help was a language I didn't speak. Mrs. Miller opened the door, but she didn't smile. She looked terrified. "Raymond, please go away," she whispered. "Edna, I just need to use the phone. The power is out, and—" "David was here, Raymond," she said, her voice trembling. "He told us you'd had a breakdown. He said you were aggressive. He told us not to let you in for our own safety. He's calling the police to do a welfare check." Behind her, I saw the flashing blue and red lights reflecting in her window.
The police officer was young. His belt creaked as he stepped onto my porch, his hand resting casually near his holster. He didn't see a man who had served his country or a man who had managed 100 workers. He saw a vulnerable adult in a stained undershirt. "Mr. Carter, your son called. He's worried you're not taking your medication. He said you were hallucinating about your pension." I stood as straight as my back would allow. "I am perfectly sane, officer. My pension was stolen. My car was taken on a fraudulent lien. I am trying to reach my daughter." The officer looked at the melted ice on the porch. "It's cold out here, sir, and your house is dark. David says you refused to let him pay the electric bill. Why don't you come with us? We'll get you a warm meal and a place to sleep at the station while we figure this out." "I'm not a criminal," I said, my voice steady, "and I'm not a child." "No one said you were, sir, but you can't stay here in the dark." I saw David's car pull up across the street. He didn't get out. He just sat there, the glow of his dashboard lighting up his face. He was watching. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to shout and wave my arms so the officer would have a reason to take me to the psych ward. I realized then that this wasn't just a mistake. This was a siege. "I'll go to a hotel," I said. "I have resources." The officer nodded. "I'll give you a lift to the Motel 6, but I have to file a report, Mr. Carter. If you don't have a way to care for yourself, the state has to step in." I went inside to grab a bag. I took Martha's photo, my medals, and Blue's leash. I left the ice. I left the insulin. I didn't want the officer to see I was sick. As we walked to the patrol car, David rolled down his window.
"Dad, just sign the papers for the home. Stop making this difficult for everyone." I didn't look at him. I got into the back of the cruiser. The plastic seat was hard and cold. As we pulled away, I looked back at my house, the house I'd paid off 30 years ago. There was a for sale sign already lying in the grass, ready to be hammered in. At the motel, the officer stayed until I checked in. I used my last few dollars for a room. The clerk looked at me like I was a vagrant. "One night," the clerk said. "Checkout is at 11 a.m. I entered the room. It smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. Blue curled up on the thin carpet, shivering. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the velvet box from my pocket. I opened it. The diamond wasn't large, but it was pure. It was the only thing I had left that David didn't know about. I looked at the rotary phone on the nightstand. I picked it up and dialed Sarah's number by heart. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, but it wasn't Sarah. "This is the Harrison County Jail. You have a collect call from an inmate. To accept, press 1. My heart stopped. Sarah? In jail? I pressed 1. "Dad? Dad, thank God! David, he set me up. He planted those pills in my car. He said if I told you about the gambling debts, he'd make sure I never saw my kids again. Dad, what has he done to you?" The line went dead. "Account balance insufficient," a cold, automated voice informed me. I stared at the receiver until the loud off-hook beep began to wail. I hung up slowly. My daughter was in a cell 3 states away because she tried to protect me. My son was a monster I had raised, fed, and loved. I looked down at my hands. They were stained with grease that never quite came out, the mark of a lifetime of honest labor. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest. Not a heart attack, not yet, but the crushing weight of a broken spirit. I had to get to the bank. If I could prove the power of attorney was forged, I could get Sarah out. I could get my life back. But I was a 79-year-old man with no car, no phone, and $4. Morning came with a gray, freezing rain. I walked out of the motel with Blue. We walked for 2 hours toward the downtown branch of the First National Bank. My shoes were soaked. Every time a car splashed through a puddle, I flinched, expecting David to be behind the wheel. When I reached the bank, I was shivering so hard I could barely speak. The lobby was warm and smelled of expensive coffee. "I need to see the manager," I told the young man at the front desk. "My name is Raymond Carter. There's been a fraud on my account." The young man looked at my wet jacket and my dog. "Sir, you can't bring pets in here, and the manager's in a meeting." "It's an emergency," I said, my voice rising. "My son, he's taking everything." A door opened, and a woman in a sharp navy suit stepped out. She looked at me with a mixture of disgust and professional concern. "I'm Mrs. Gable, the branch manager. Is there a problem?" I explained it all. The pension, the car, Sarah. I spoke clearly, trying to sound like the foreman I used to be. I told her I had worked 43 years and never missed a payment. She pulled up my file on a tablet. Her expression went flat. "Mr. Carter, I see the power of attorney right here. It was notarized and filed 2 weeks ago. It gives David Carter full control over all assets due to your documented cognitive decline." "I don't have cognitive decline," I shouted. A security guard stepped closer. "The document includes a letter from Dr. Aris. It states you are no longer fit to manage your affairs. The pension reversal was a request from the legal guardian, your son, to consolidate funds into a private trust. He's stealing it. He's gambling it away." "Sir, you're becoming agitated," Mrs. Gable said softly. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call the authorities. Your son has already warned us you might come here and cause a scene." I looked around the bank. People were staring. I saw a woman pull her child closer to her as if I were a threat. I wasn't Raymond Carter, the veteran. I wasn't Raymond Carter, the foreman. I was just a crazy old man in a wet coat. "Check the signature," I pleaded. "Just look at it." She turned the screen around. There it was, my name written in a shaky, trembling hand. It looked like my writing if I had been terrified when I wrote it. "I never signed that," I whispered. "The notary was present, sir. Now please leave." I walked out into the rain. I felt the dizziness wash over me. My blood sugar was crashing. I reached into my pocket and felt the velvet box. It was the only thing I had left. I looked across the street at a sign that said, "Pawn shop, top dollar for gold." I had to choose, Martha's memory or the chance to fight. The pawn shop smelled of dust and desperation. Behind the thick plexiglass, a man with a goatee looked at the ring through a loop. "Nice stone," he grunted. "Old cut, maybe half a carat. I can give you 500. "It's worth 3,000, I said, my heart breaking. "The setting is platinum." 500, take it or leave it, Gramps. I got a mortgage to pay." I looked at the ring. I remembered the night I gave it to her. We were in a booth at a diner in 1965. I was about to ship out. She had cried and told me she'd wait forever. She did. She waited through the war, through the long shifts at the mill, through the lean years when the strike hit. "Keep it safe," I whispered, pushing the box through the slot. "I'm coming back for it." "Sure you are," the man said, counting out $500 in oily 20s. I bought a cheap burner phone at a drugstore and a sandwich for Blue. Then I caught a bus to the VA hospital. If I could get a doctor to certify I was sane, I could overturn the power of attorney. The waiting room was packed with men who looked just like me, tired, worn, and waiting for a system that was always too slow. I sat there for 6 hours. My vision was blurring. I needed my insulin, but I couldn't get it without a prescription, and my records were flagged. Finally, a nurse called my name. "Raymond Carter, room 4. I stood up, but the world tilted. I grabbed the chair to steady myself. "Mr. Carter, are you okay?" Just a bit tired," I managed. I followed her into the small exam room. A doctor came in 5 minutes later. He was young enough to be my grandson, with a clipboard and a hurried air. "All right, Raymond, I see here your son called ahead. He mentioned you might be seeking a competency clearance to bypass his guardianship." My heart sank. David was everywhere. He'd anticipated every move. "Doctor, he's lying. He's taking my pension to pay gambling debts. He put my daughter in jail." The doctor sighed. "Raymond, paranoia is a very common symptom of late-stage dementia. David provided us with videos of you talking to your deceased wife. He showed us the unpaid bills you forgot about." "I didn't forget them. He took the mail." The doctor stepped closer, looking at my eyes. "You're jaundiced, Raymond, and your breath smells like fruit. You're in ketoacidosis. When was the last time you had your insulin?" "My power was cut. I'm admitting you to the psych ward for observation and stabilization," the doctor said, his voice firm. "It's for your own safety." "No," I said, backing away. "No, I won't go." "If you refuse, I'll have to call for an involuntary hold. You are a danger to yourself." 2 orderlies appeared in the doorway. They were large, wearing gray scrubs. I looked at Blue, who was growling low in his throat. "Sir, please, don't make this difficult," one of the orderlies said. I looked at the window. It was a long drop. I looked at the door. They were blocking it. Suddenly, the hospital intercom crackled. "Code Blue, emergency room. Code Blue." The orderlies hesitated. In that split second of distraction, I bolted. I didn't run. I couldn't run, but I moved with a desperate, shuffling speed. I shoved past a laundry cart and burst through the heavy fire doors into the rainy alley. I collapsed against a brick wall, gasping for air. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. I looked down at Blue. "We're on our own, boy," I wheezed. I pulled out the burner phone. I had one person left to call, someone I hadn't spoken to in 20 years, my old sergeant from the 101st, if he was still alive.
The phone rang and rang. Each ring felt like a hammer blow to my head. "Yeah," a gravelly voice finally answered. "Mick, it's Ray Carter." There was a long silence. I could hear a television blaring a baseball game in the background. "Carter? You son of a gun. I thought you died in Cleveland 10 years ago." "Not yet, Mick, but I'm close. I need a favor. A no-questions-asked kind of favor. Those are the only kind worth doing. Where are you?" 2 hours later, a beat-up Ford F-150 pulled into the alley behind the VA. Mick didn't look like a soldier anymore. He was hunched over, breathing through an oxygen tank, but his eyes were still sharp enough to cut glass. "Get in," he said, "and bring the dog." We drove to a small trailer park on the edge of the city. Mick didn't ask about the rain or the hospital gown peeking from under my jacket. He just handed me a bottle of water and a sandwich. "David did this, didn't he?" Mick asked, staring at the road. "How did you know?" "I saw him at the mill picnic back in '98. Kid had Snake written all over him. You were too proud to see it, Ray. You wanted a legacy so bad you ignored the rot." He was right. I'd given David everything. I'd paid for his college, his first house, his bail the first time he got into trouble. I thought I was being a good father. I was just feeding a predator. "I need to get to the pension office in Columbus, the main headquarters. If I can talk to the board, you won't get past the lobby. But I know a guy, old Pete. He works security there. He owes me his life from a hole in the ground near the border. He can get us in after hours." "Why are you helping me, Mick? We haven't talked since the reunion." Mick looked at me, his face softening for a fleeting second. "Because we don't leave men behind, Ray. Not in the jungle and not in Ohio." That night, I slept on Mick's couch. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. But at 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. I peered into the kitchen. Mick was on the phone. "Yeah, he's here. He's in bad shape, David. He needs help. Look, I don't want any trouble. You said there's a reward for finding him. 5,000? My blood turned to ice. "Okay," Mick whispered. "Tomorrow morning, the parking lot at the Perkins on Route 4. Just have the money ready. I'll bring him." I retreated back to the couch, my heart hammering. Even Mick, even the man who had carried me through a rice paddy under fire, was selling me out for $5,000. I looked at Blue. He was watching me, his tail giving a single mournful thump. I didn't wait for morning. I waited until Mick's snores filled the trailer. I grabbed my bag, crept out the door, and disappeared into the night. I had no money, no car, and no friends. But I had one thing David didn't have. I had nothing left to lose. I started walking toward the city center. I knew where David kept his ledger. He was a creature of habit. He kept all his gambling debts and forged papers in a safe in his home office. If I was going down, I was taking his world with me.
I reached David's house at dawn. It was a colonial-style place in the suburbs, the kind of house my steel mill pension had helped buy. I hid in the bushes across the street, watching. David came out at 7:30 a.m., looking sharp in a tailored suit. He looked like a success. He looked like a man who hadn't just destroyed his father. He climbed into his BMW and drove away. I knew where he kept the spare key, inside a hollowed-out plastic rock near the patio. I felt like a thief, but this was my house too, in a way. Inside, the house was cold and sterile. I made my way to the office. The safe was a small, fireproof box under the desk. I knew the code. It was my birthday. He'd used it as a taunt, a way to remember the man he was bleeding dry. 0124. The lock clicked. I opened it, and my breath hitched. It wasn't just my pension. There were life insurance policies David had taken out on me. There were stacks of mail addressed to me, utilities, tax warnings, letters from Sarah, all hidden away. And there, at the bottom, was a notebook. It was a log. Names of people at the bank, the pension office, even the VA. Beside each name was a dollar amount. Bribes. He'd been paying off clerks and administrators for months to ensure my decline was well documented. But there was something else, a folder labeled DNR. I opened it. It was a do not resuscitate order. It had my forged signature. It was dated for the following week, the same day I was supposed to be transferred to the state facility. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was planning my death. Once I was in that facility, accidents happen. With a DNR on file, they wouldn't even try to save me. I felt a surge of rage so pure it cleared the fog in my brain. I tucked the notebook and the DNR into my jacket. Suddenly, the garage door hummed. David was back. I scrambled to the closet and pulled the door shut, leaving a tiny crack. David walked into the office, talking on his cell phone. "Yeah, I know the old man escaped. Mick called me. He's wandering around somewhere. Just keep the facility bed open. Once we find him, the DNR is already in the system. We'll just wait for his heart to give out. The insurance pays double for natural causes in a care setting." He sat at the desk, inches away from me. He opened the drawer, looking for something. He noticed the safe was slightly ajar. His body went rigid. "Dad," he whispered, his voice turning cold. "I know you're in here." He stood up and walked toward the closet. I gripped a heavy brass bookend I'd found on the floor. The closet door swung open. David looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "You really think you can win, old man? You're a ghost. You don't have a penny. You don't have a voice." "I have the truth, David," I said, my voice vibrating with iron. "Truth doesn't pay the bills," he laughed. He reached out to grab the notebook from my hand. I didn't use the bookend. I used my fist. 43 years of the mill went into that punch. It caught him square in the jaw, and he went down hard, his head hitting the edge of the desk. He stayed down. I didn't check if he was breathing. I took his car keys and his phone. I had one stop to make before the police found me. I drove the BMW like a man possessed. My hands felt steady on the leather wheel. I wasn't heading for the police. Not yet. David had friends there. I was heading to the one place where the truth couldn't be silenced by a bribe. The Cleveland Gazette building. I walked into the lobby, the notebook clutched to my chest. I looked like a madman, hospital gown visible under my coat, soaking wet, eyes wild. "I need to talk to a reporter," I told the security guard, "someone who handles corruption." "Sir, you need an appointment," the guard said, reaching for his radio. "Tell them Raymond Carter is here. Tell them I have the Republic Steel pension ledger. And tell them I have a story about a man who's being murdered by his own son." A young woman in the lobby stopped. She was carrying a coffee and a stack of papers. She looked at me, really looked at me. "I'm Elena Vance. I cover the city beat. Come with me." We sat in a small glass room. I laid everything out. The notebook, the bribes, the forged DNR, the voluntary waiver. I told her about the 101st Airborne. I told her about Martha. I told her how it felt to be erased. She recorded everything. Her eyes grew wider as she flipped through David's ledger. "This isn't just about you, Raymond. Look at these other names. There are dozens of them. He was doing this to other veterans too. He was running a pension recovery scam." My heart nearly broke. I wasn't the only one. "Can you publish it?" I asked. "I need to verify the signatures, and I need to get a statement from the bank. But Raymond, once this hits, there's no going back. Your son will go to prison." "He was already gone," I said. "He died a long time ago." As I spoke, the glass door opened.
2 police officers stepped in. They weren't smiling. "Raymond Carter, you're under arrest for assault and grand theft auto. Your son is in the hospital with a concussion." I stood up and held out my wrists. I didn't feel afraid. "Take the notebook, Elena," I said. "I have it, Raymond, I promise." They led me out in handcuffs. As we passed through the lobby, people stopped to watch. I held my head high. I was a foreman, I was a soldier, I was a father. They put me in the back of the squad car. As we drove away, I saw David's BMW being towed. I was taken to the county jail, the same place Sarah was being held. The processing sergeant looked at my paperwork. "Carter? We got a Sarah Carter in Block C. Any relation?" "She's my daughter," I said. Tell her the cavalry is coming." I was put in a cell. The walls were gray stone. The bed was a thin mat. But for the first time in a week, the lights were on. I sat on the bunk and closed my eyes. I could feel the cold settling into my joints, but my mind was clear. 2 hours later, the cell door opened. It wasn't a guard. It was a man in a black suit with a briefcase. "Mr. Carter, I'm an attorney from the Veterans Legal Defense Fund. We just got a call from a reporter named Elena Vance, and we also got a call from a Mr. Mick Foley." I blinked. "Mick?" "He said to tell you he's a terrible liar, but he's a great distraction. He knew David was tracking your phone. He called David to lure him out so you could get into the house. He never intended to sell you out, Raymond. He just needed to buy you time." I leaned my head against the wall, and for the first time, I let the tears fall.
The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal fire. The Gazette ran the story on the front page, "The Steel Mill Scammer," how one veteran fought back against a silent execution. The public outcry was a tidal wave. The Pension Oversight Committee, terrified of the bad press, found the clerical error within 6 hours. My pension wasn't just restored, it was back paid with interest. The bank manager, Mrs. Gable, was fired. The notary who witnessed my forged signature turned out to be David's girlfriend. She flipped on him the moment the FBI knocked on her door. I was released from custody on Thursday. All charges were dropped. My first stop was the Harrison County Jail. I stood at the gate as Sarah walked out. She looked thin, her eyes red-rimmed, but when she saw me, she ran. We held each other in the parking lot for a long time. "I'm sorry, Dad," she sobbed. "I should have been there." "You were there when it mattered, Sarah. You told me the truth." We went to the pawn shop. The man with the goatee saw me coming and didn't even wait for me to speak. He pulled the velvet box from the safe and slid it across the counter. "I didn't list it," he said, looking at his shoes. "I knew you'd be back." I put the ring back in my pocket. Finally, we went home. The power was back on. The for sale sign was gone, chopped into kindling on the front lawn. Blue was waiting on the porch, his tail nearly knocking over a flower pot when he saw the Buick, which the police had returned to my driveway. I sat in my kitchen chair and looked at Martha's photo. "We did it, honey," I whispered. But the victory felt heavy. David was in a cell now, facing 20 years for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted manslaughter. He'd called me from the station, begging me to drop the statement. He'd cried and told me he had a gambling problem, that he was sick, that he was my only son. I hung up. That evening, a black car pulled into the driveway. A man I recognized from the news, the CEO of the pension fund, stepped out. He was carrying a briefcase and a look of deep, practiced regret. "Mr. Carter," he said, standing in my kitchen, "we are deeply sorry for the oversight. We want to make this right. Beyond the restoration of your funds, we've prepared a settlement offer. $500,000. In exchange, we just need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
We'd like to keep the internal details of our administration out of the courts." I looked at the check. It was more money than I'd earned in a decade at the mill. It could pay for Sarah's kids' college. It could buy me a house in Florida. But then I looked at the list Elena had given me. The other veterans, the ones who didn't have a Mick or an Elena, the ones who had died in those state facilities because they were told they were useless. I picked up the check. I looked the CEO in the eye. "My dignity isn't for sale," I said. "I'll see you in court, not for me, for all the others." He left fuming. I sat back down. I felt a strange peace, but then my burner phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of a hospital bed. A man was lying there, his face bruised, his eyes filled with a terrifying, cold hatred. It was David, and he wasn't in jail. He was in a private clinic, and he was holding a document I'd never seen before. The text message was followed by a voice memo. I pressed play, my heart a lead weight. "You think you won, Dad?" David's voice was a rasping hiss. "The DA let me out on medical bail because of the concussion you gave me. And while you were playing hero, I found the one thing you forgot. Mom's real will. The one she signed the week before she died when she was confused from the morphine. The one that leaves the house and the land to me, effective immediately. I've already filed the eviction. The sheriff will be there in an hour." I looked at Sarah. She had heard it too. "He's bluffing. He has to be." But I knew David. He was a cornered rat, and a rat always has one last bite. I stood up. I didn't feel old anymore. I felt like a man who had one final job to do. I went to the basement. Behind a loose brick near the furnace, I pulled out a small locked metal box. I hadn't opened it since 1970. Inside was my service pistol and a single yellowed envelope. "Dad, what is that?" Sarah asked. "It's the truth about your mother," I said. We drove to the clinic where David was being held. I pushed past the nurses, my medals pinned to my old VA jacket. I looked like the foreman again. I looked like authority. I burst into David's room. He was sitting up, a smirk on his face, holding a legal document. "Right on time," David sneered. "Sign the house over to me now, and I'll let you stay in the guest room until you die. Otherwise, you're on the street tonight." I didn't pull the gun. I pulled the yellowed envelope. "Open it, David." He frowned, taking the paper. As he read, the color drained from his face. His hands began to shake, truly shake. This is a lie," he whispered. "It's a DNA test from 1975, I said, my voice steady. "Your mother and we had a rough patch when I came back from Nam. She was honest with me. She told me you weren't mine. I stayed anyway. I raised you as my own. I loved you as my own. I never told a soul because I wanted you to be a Carter." I leaned over the bed, my face inches from his. "But that will you're holding, it leaves everything to her biological heirs. If you use that will, David, you prove you aren't a biological Carter. And according to the trust your grandfather set up, only blood heirs get the land. If you're not my son, you get nothing. Not the house, not the pension, not even the name." David looked at the document, then at me. The power he thought he had vanished like smoke. He was a man with no father, no inheritance, and a mountain of criminal charges. You knew?" David gasped. "I knew, and I loved you anyway, but that ended the moment you tried to kill me." I took the will from his hand and ripped it into pieces. "The sheriff is coming, David, but he's coming for you. Your medical bail was revoked 10 minutes ago. I called the DA." 2 officers entered the room. They didn't help him up. They handcuffed him to the bed rail. I walked out of the hospital. The Cleveland air was cold, but the sun was breaking through the clouds. Sarah was waiting by the car. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over," I said. I reached into my pocket and touched the engagement ring. I wasn't a rich man. I was just a man who had his name back, and that was enough. We drove home. I sat on my porch with Blue and a hot cup of coffee. I looked out at the neighborhood I'd helped build. I was 79, my pension was safe, and my daughter was home. I wasn't a ghost. I was Raymond Carter, and I was still here. Like, comment, and subscribe if you think Raymond did the right thing. Question: should Raymond have told David the truth about his birth sooner, or was it the ultimate weapon for justice?